I know, well, I would.
Yeah. Well, this is good. We might actually have that. We can actually go around and introduce
That's what I
everyone
was
at this
thinking.
point, which is nice.
Yeah, I think we should.
Is there wireless here that we can get on?
Yes, there is. And actually on that wall right there is the, it should be the address and the password. And also there's coffee and soda and tea at the back, so please help yourselves.
Oh, good idea. I'll do this with quorum.
This is the same, right? These are just in color?
Exactly. I mean, front back. Yep. Here, Simon. Sure. Complimentary. Oh, sure. Hello. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
I'm just going to ask everyone to turn on your microphone. If you just push the button in front of you, it should flash green. And that way, because we're on camera now, so that way we'll pick up quality sound. Hey, welcome. Come on in. Hi everyone, thank you for coming today. My name is Sarah Sladen and I manage the Youth Alliance here at Interaction. And I'm so pleased that you could join us. Just as a heads up, you're on camera. We're recording this event and we'll be putting it online, so please feel free to share it with your field staff and headquarters. I wanted to introduce Mike Tetelman and Tara Noronha from Mercy Corps and EDC, who will be presenting on youth assessments for youth livelihood programs today. And this event forms part of our learning series. It's a year-round forum for learning and exchange focused on different aspects of youth development. So part of what we'll do is be taking comments and recommendations from the sessions and feeding it into the work of the Youth Alliance going forward. So with that, I think we should get started. Just a logistic aspect. We have these little mics in front of you. This is to pick up sound for the recording, so you don't need to hold the mic up to your mouth because that will actually distort the sound. So just keep it in front of you, but make sure that the light is flashing green. You just have to push the button once, okay? So if you could all make sure that the light's on in front of you as we get started. And I thought it might make sense to go around and introduce everyone since it's a nice small gathering and we're going to be focused on discussion and exchange. But maybe we should start with the folks on the phone. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Janice Broadman, EDC.
Great.
Hi, James.
Tina Robin, Kamonic.
Great.
Gustavo Payan, EDC.
Meredith Lee and Steve Cumming from the MasterCard Foundation.
Carla Yoder, Global Communities.
Great. All right.
Carrie Miller, CRS.
Good sound turn. Okay, would you like to start?
Hi, Simon James, EDC. I was Chief of Party on the Advancing Youth Project.
Caitlin Buller with TechnoServe. Into Clinic USA. Kenna Costello, Winrock International.
Amanda Epton, PACT. Sarah Rutherford, Innovations and Civic Participation.
Caroline Lai, Aga Khan Foundation.
Anne Hershkowitz, EDC.
Nancy Chervin, EDC.
Katie Raymond, International Youth Foundation.
Great, thanks. Okay. Get started then. First of all, thanks so much for coming out on a Monday afternoon where the weather could ideally be a little warmer, but thanks for making the trek out, really. And we hope that today the discussion on market assessments is really interesting and provides some nice insights, and that we all have a good discussion, get to know each other, and so forth. And really our focus, I think, for Tara and me is informal, interactive, and participatory. Exactly. So maybe we'll just start with some context about why we're giving this talk, why we, a couple months ago, were really sitting around and saying, maybe we should really give a presentation on this and have a conversation. So as you all know, I mean, it seems like over the past several years, youth workforce development programs have gotten better in a lot of ways, at least theoretically, in trying to match supply and demand. I mean, it sort of was rhetorical, but understood that for so long there was so much emphasis on training, and the voc ed sort of institutions and universities or what have you on skills building. But as we all know, so much of that was really supply driven, and there just wasn't a lot of focused attention paid on the demand side, what the private sector was looking for, even either from sort of a larger sort of industry perspective, larger companies, certainly not from an informal economy perspective, really whatsoever. And there's just was massive amounts of mismatch, and of course graduates of these programs who are going out and not having effective alignment and really dashed expectations and opportunities. So it seems about 7 years ago, I put a number on it, much more focused attention started on doing these kind of labor market assessments. And what we were observing was, at their best, we've, both in terms of, and what Tar and I will speak about it, both in terms of assessments that we've done together in Liberia, as well as others have worked on at EDC in Guyana and some other stuff we're doing, and Tar will talk about what
Mercy Corps did in Kenya. Reference that study as well.
Exactly. So looking at those and assessments and just what else has been in the field, we've seen that at their best, market assessments do, several things, or are supposed to do several things, particularly at a local and nuanced level. Ideally looking at market niches that are really good for both males and females. So taking a gender-sensitive approach, looking carefully at the value chains and where the opportunities or constraints are in different parts of the value chains, both from an employer perspective, a skills perspective, a youth participatory perspective, and so forth. So what are the skills and experience needed? Ideally, they're supposed to, at their best, really get into issues of perceptions, both of employers towards youth, but also youth's nuanced perceptions about the skills and jobs market. What good partnership opportunities exist out there with the private sector to build on from these, And then a lot of other factors, how can role models and mentors really be used and utilized and fostered in these kinds of environments and value chains? And then a lot of the practical side, what are some really potential good, strong internship opportunities, apprenticeship, job placement that can ideally be utilized? Well, what we felt, though, was that, and we're not saying we have the answers by any means, a lot of the studies seem to be very complex, and and we're going to kind of get into that. And what we want to do is kind of have a sort of fun sort of top 10 approaches or things that work, things that are challenging, and we'll get into that a little bit. We felt like, okay, well, why don't we look at some of the stuff we worked on together and some other things, draw it out, some of the lessons learned, and really, most importantly, hear from you all, too, who've been engaging in these, and kind of come to some shared understandings of what works, what doesn't work, and maybe come up with some practical recommendations that AIYD can take forward in an effective practices kind of context, and all just keep growing and learning from each other. So that's really the context for why we wanted to put this together, why we're really honored and happy to be here with you. So that's sort of a little bit of context. And Tara?
Yeah, and I'll be talking a little bit about how we can actually engage young people in the process. So there's obvious, advantages and disadvantages to that, but I'll be speaking to that a bit later. But we really wanted to make this as participatory as possible, so I wanted to turn it over to some of you and ask you about your impressions of labor market assessments. Are they happening? Are they effective? What is your experience on them?
Can I also just jump in and remind those of you on the phone, if you could please mute your microphones just to avoid any background noise? Thanks.
So Anne, please. Thank you.
So my impression of labor market assessments is, I know they are happening, definitely. I've been in projects that are working on them. I'm not so sure they're effective. What we've had is at least recent experience has been a very detailed report that nobody can really read or follow what they're saying. And it seems maybe that the group didn't dig quite deep enough. Mm-hmm. So it makes for a nice, lots of charts and nice graphs, but I'm not really sure how to take it forward. So now we have this information and, okay, help, what do we do with it?
Right.
So it's hard to implement from that point
I
forward.
think it's very difficult to implement. And we're also wondering maybe if what the group found just was confirming sort of general ideas that already existed instead of really challenging those ideas.
Right.
About what the labor market is like in that country.
That's helpful. Great. Any other insights? Sort of, thanks, Anne, what people have been working on? These?
Hi, this is Steve from the MasterCard Foundation. We've used some value chain assessment, market assessments with two partners, one TechnoServe and the other we're in the midst of with Save the Children. Mm-hmm. And to date, I think they've been fairly successful in identifying, demand-side opportunities for young people. One of the initial challenges is translating some of the content from the surveys into actually training curricula, and then moving forward with kind of technical training that's related to the opportunities identified in the market assessment.
Right.
But with the value chain analysis that was done internally with TechnoServe and with an external market assessment completed by Dalberg, for Save the Children, both of those seem to be quite valuable tools in kind of setting the stage for an eventual training with young people.
Great. Steve, thank you. That's really helpful. Yes, hi. Do you want to introduce yourself? If you don't?
Sure. I'm Pamela Young with Plan International, and I just wanted to mention some work that we've done in Vietnam with a local NGO, which we helped to set up, called REACH, and we did some market assessments and have turned that into training curricula, which are used to help train young people, and from that, these young people have gone into the job market. So we have done extensive assessments in many parts of the country and then turned it into training curriculum. We used a model which originally came out of India. It was called the LABS model, and it's primarily something that can be used in an urban location. It's much better in an urban location than a rural location, but it's worked really well.
Okay.
Can I just ask, sorry to be the logistics queen here, but if we could make sure that everyone just has a microphone in front of them when you're speaking so that it's picked up on the recorder, that would be great. Thanks. And we may have to share because they're being charged. So if you don't mind just making sure we pass the mics down, that way we can make sure those on the phone can also hear what you have to say.
Excellent. Okay, great. Any other insights or comments?
Either on the utility of the assessments or if they're happening or the process.
I think, again, coming back to what Anne was saying, it's how to use them, because whether they should be just used for project purposes or how to disseminate them further. They're fine for project design, but surely they need to go to a wider audience. So, again, how complicated are they? Is it appropriate for a wider audience? How does it get further out? How do ministries get that information?
Right.
And I just want to echo the question that was from the person from MasterCard on the phone about how the information gets integrated into curriculum development, training design, when the youth start getting that information, when the staff getting the information, because the curriculum development may be happening before or simultaneously, and they really need to work together, but that's where I find they don't always.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. This is exactly the kind of practical and really salient observations that we were hoping to set the context. And to some degree, so what Tara and I were thinking about sort of some top 10 themes, or exactly echoing these points about sort of, the application of these findings and the design, timing, and when and how. So forgive us if some of them are almost now repeating what you were saying or reinforcing, but we'll maybe just go through them a little bit quickly and then really turn into this full-on discussion. So thanks a lot for that. So yeah, that was really picking up a couple of the points. One of the top things is we were talking about when framing this was the challenges of design and sort of are LMAs really sufficiently almost thinking of the end in mind first in terms of what their ideal outcomes and objectives are. These or are they are they planned too complex from the beginning and not focused with an eye toward what the use is in the application. So really what we were thinking, focusing up front, having a really well-articulated methodology that really starts from the end goal in mind of what you want this for clearly, and that it's agreed upon by the different stakeholders, both in ministry, the project, and others, is essential, and youth themselves. And we often find that, there's some really hard questions to tackle, but they need to be very honestly and transparently addressed from the beginning. I mean, do you want this to be such a really almost full-fledged, detailed assessment that's almost sort of World Bank quality, that a sort of major international investor could sort of use this? Well, that's one very type of sort of Cadillac, as we say, LMA type assessment, but it may not be useful for the type of programs that we're doing, particularly with the resources to bear. Another is, how detailed do you really want to drill your study to if you're working in different counties? Do you sort of sacrifice, or do you focus on depth, or do you focus on scope and breadth? Do you really go down to the very district or towns in terms of really micro job level opportunities? It's really a resource allocation question, and it's a question of, again, what do you want this LMA to ultimately be about? Should you be focusing really on maybe really tangible, practical partnership possibilities and opportunities with, say, the private sector? Is that really one of your agreed upon goals? What we found in Guyana, for example, was coaching and mentorship is a really important part of that program. And, our thought was, well, maybe in an ideal world, in that sense, you design your LMA so that the outcome you already know ahead of time, it's to really help your coaches and mentors in these districts, give them very clear and practical and actionable guidance about who to go follow up with. So, and sort of designing, again, your LMA from that objective standpoint in mind. And then finally, do you want to get into issues of perceptions, employer and youth perceptions? Is that sort of type of approach really important? So those are some really key sort of variables to contend with. And then just what we also were thinking, I mean, how do you balance qualitative and quantitative approaches in your LMA, and being very upfront about that? And, do you want more sort of anecdotal information? Do you want information, again, that gets into perceptions? Or do you want, really deeply sort of rigorous analytical information across counties that can be measured and so forth? So I think a lot depends in some sense on your capacity of your teams in the field to carry this out, analyze and use the data. So I guess the takeaway from that is what you were saying a lot too. I'd really be clear about your objectives from the beginning up front in your design and what your end goal is, and try and be as simple as possible, ideally, as I think we're seeing in the methodology, not to be way too complex about it. So that's one takeaway. Tara?
And that lends itself to Simon's point about, is this LMA specifically for the program or for greater knowledge? So this is number 2 on our top 10 list, although now I'm realizing if this was a proper top 10, like David Letterman said, it should be number 9. But number 2, let us know if we're missing anything, is having a youth-led approach or a really participatory approach to these assessments. So we see globally that young people around the world are really craving these leadership opportunities and also are really wanting a better understanding of just jobs that are available and what the local labor market is looking for. So in both, and I'll be referring to 2 assessments that Mercy Corps was part of. One is with the Yes Youth Can program in Kenya, and that's funded by USAID. And the other is the Advancing Youth program, which we are partners with EDC, and Mercy Corps is working on the livelihoods component, and that's also funded by USAID. So both in Kenya and Liberia, we worked with local partners to identify strong and able youth that could take part in the assessment. And these young people were really engaged in every part of the process, from developing the survey tools, so business questionnaires that were going to local employers, as well as focus group discussion questions that they were administering to their peers. They helped sketch out the methodology. If there were specific businesses or large companies they were interested in learning about, we added them to the list. If there were specific sectors that they felt were very appropriate for young people, we ensured that they were part of the process as well. And we also identified existing appropriate value chains in order to find appropriate entry points both for male and female youth. So the young people were engaged again in tool development, and then they actually went out and implemented the surveys themselves, so the questionnaires and the FGDs. And then some of the youth helped us with data entry and some basic data analysis as well. And I'll talk about this a bit later, but there are many benefits to engaging youth in this process. So just simply building their social capital, enabling them to have exposure to some of these private sector businesses that they perhaps would not have links to before, and also really building not only their life skills and communication and leadership, but also really helping them develop some a little bit more technical skills in market research and whatnot. But really, I think the main priority was that they themselves were the ones that could go out and really identify labor market demand, so they could have a first-hand knowledge of the opportunities that were available for them and their economies. So number 2, youth-led focus.
All right. Number 3 or number 8. Really, to be clear about formal versus informal economy. We've seen a lot of times that it's so easy, and hey, we're part of this too. You kind of almost naturally gravitate toward the formal economy. These are your identified businesses, your identified partners. You've maybe got sort of cost share requirements or public-private partnership requirements, and but what we've seen so many times, it depends on the environment, but generally the environments we're working in, the informal economy is the predominant sector, particularly the agricultural, but also just trade and sort of services or sectors that are associated with agriculture. So frankly, if we could do it all over again in some of them, it would just be focusing very much your resources on your informal economy right away, and having to probably think about, and this would be an interesting topic to talk about later, what kind of questions do you ask? What are the right types of questions to ask your actors in the informal economy versus, say, your more sort of established businesses in the formal economy? Are you really needing to get different kinds of information to really make appropriate decisions about the types of curriculum, the skills needed, placement opportunities, and so forth? It may be that some very different types of questions need to be asked. So that's another one to touch on.
Okay, so number 4 is understanding the larger context beyond just employment opportunities. So while the main focus of assessments is to identify those concrete job opportunities or self-employment placements. It's also to uncover, rich information that exists about how young people are operating within this larger market system. And often there are many other kind of social constraints that are preventing them from getting jobs. So just for an example, in Liberia, we spoke to a lot of young women who said that they did not have appropriate female role models, or they did not have any exposure to female success stories in their life. So obviously the president of Liberia is a very well-known and respected person, but she's also is very separate from where a lot of these young girls were living and were operating. And because they did not have these positive influences in their life, they felt that they were being made to make poor choices. So we found out that a lot of the young women we talked to were engaging in transactional sex for income based on limited opportunities. And they also said this was because that a lot of employers didn't necessarily trust young women in Liberia. So in order for us to really find appropriate work opportunities for young females, we also wanted to kind of address or be aware of some of these other social constraints that would hinder them from entering the job market. And so as part of Advancing Youth, there is a mentorship and role model component, and I think Advancing Youth is 75% female, so it's very important that we were able to kind of uncover some of that information as well. So it's kind of looking at the larger market system that these youth are operating in.
Okay. Another one that we grapple with all the time is how best to really engage the private sector when you're doing this. I mean, it is complicated. Obviously, what is the private sector? It's very diverse anyway. It's everything from, of course, your multinationals operating to your large national businesses, and then, medium and small enterprises. So that's, first of all, a challenge, is just sort of orienting your methodology and your approach to the type of private sector and what you want out of the engagement, both in terms of the data. So we find that sometimes, these companies, you go to them, you have your assessors, they're trained, and the companies said, well, you're the 9th group that's come to us already and asked us to do a survey. What are you, and we've really never heard any follow-up from anyone else who's come, so what's going to be any different with you guys? So, sort of being very aware that these folks often are, particularly in countries where the private sector and larger private sector is relatively small, and the focus a lot of development interventions. I think being mindful of that is pretty important. And, they naturally have fears, especially when you're getting into issues about skills and competencies that they're looking for, and challenges they have recruiting, how they're doing recruiting, perceptions they have of youth. There's going to be issues sometimes that we found that they're afraid of giving away information they feel is either proprietary, confidential. You'll get a person who will be like, well, I really need to call my HR department in Monrovia to get sort of clearance to, provide this kind of information to you on job trends. So really being well coordinated and sort of understanding that linkage of, say, your headquarters and your field offices, or where the private sector is working, is important. But I think more than just sort of the don'ts is what's in it for them. I think just going into these assessments, being really about what are their incentives for participating. I mean, what can we possibly offer them beyond just sort of extracting data from them to help them sort of see the value in this. And part of it is just back to this issue of knowledge dissemination and being very intentional and proactive, going back to them with the results of the data. I mean, as sort of saying, look, this is, maybe you'll find this interesting as part of your broader industry survey yourself. So really looking for those key leverage points and incentives for them goes a long way.
And so number 6 are capacity issues. So while there are many advantages to engaging youth in these assessments, there are also obviously some disadvantages, and it probably doesn't surprise you that capacity is one of them. It also depends on context quite a bit. So for example, when we were in Liberia, even with the initial assessment, it was really difficult for us to find youth who had the reading and the writing and the comprehension skills that we wanted to really conduct a survey of this nature. So the way that we kind of tested that was, and you actually went out and did a mini LMA where we took a handful of youth and kind of monitored and evaluated some of their skills in not only going out and implementing the surveys, but also in capturing the data, both on the quantitative and the qualitative tools. And there's absolutely some extra coaching and training that's required. So in both Kenya and Liberia, this assessment was the first, professional interaction that many of these youth had actually had with the private sector in terms of, a professional interaction. So we actually spent a lot of time on things as subtle as, okay, how do you present yourself? What information would you give them? Being patient if you're interviewing a local shop owner and some customers come in. How would you handle that? How do you groom yourself appropriately? All little tips that really helped them to lead the assessment, but also helped them professionally and down the line as well. And we found that because, assessment data only lasts for so long, and markets are very dynamic and they're constantly changing, especially in a lot of the transitional environments where we all work. It's really necessary to go out and kind of do second versions of the market assessment for a particular program to find out what has changed. And through a TOT model, we can therefore build the capacity of selected youth leaders. So hopefully for the second run of the assessment, I'm sure some supervision, but minimal oversight from the rest of the program team. So that's one way to get around it.
Well, and just speaking on that point, Tara, that you raised, we all kind of hope for occasional wonderful light bulb moments about, wow, we're so lucky to do what we do and get paid for it or everything else. And for me, just an amazing experience in Liberia was when the assessors, they came back from the field. This was in the precursor stage, the mapping stage, and they had presented all this data, and we analyzed it all, and they got to be part of this process of seeing both how the analysis was conducted based on what they had actually gained in terms of the questioning and so on, and what the trends were, and sort of seeing their role in mapping out and articulating these broader trends and being part of a larger whole. And you could just see their own, it was wonderful, that sense of sort of recognition and excitement that they had, like, wow, so those questions that I was asking Buchanan Renewable and, has led to sort of this part. So anyway, that was just really empowering, I think, as well from a psychological point of view, and incredibly gratifying for me personally. I really appreciate that. So definitely. So one question, again, more of a question than a sort of finding, is just how do we better integrate labor market assessments and all this rich data that we're gathering, both in the baselines and the iterative processes and so on, into our monitoring and evaluation types of work. It seems, and this is back to that comment raised also about sort of sequencing and timing, bless you. There your comment was about, Nancy, about timing of curriculum and the LMA, but to me this is also a sequencing question about when you're spending so much in terms of resources to capture and get great information both on your baselines for your monitoring and evaluations and, say, your livelihood programs, but you're also expending all that energy on your labor market assessments and you're gathering tremendous information. How can we better sort of marry those efforts and inform both of them together? So that's something I think we're all trying to refine and analyze and working on doing that better. I guess another broader question about knowledge dissemination in this is, it seems like so many LMAs have been done now, and in different countries, could there or should there be some sort of repository, if you will, to really house more LMAs or sort of market assessments writ large? Is it the role of an AIYD, of other kinds of portal type approach to maybe where all these best practices and finding and data can be shared? Granted, the LMAs, the market information can be a little dated, after a while, but having those up there in a central repository would be fantastic. So that's sort of a question to put out there to everybody.
Okay, so number 8, we have all this robust information. How can we use it? So you spoke to the point that sometimes these studies just sit on a shelf, and we definitely don't want that. So how can we make sure that these reports are really actionable and can have some program impact? So in Kenya and Liberia, we used the information in a variety of different ways, but a lot of it went towards building the curricula and the skills that the youth were being trained in. So for example, in Kenya, one of the results showed us that a lot of employers felt that youth had unrealistically high expectations of their salary. So that was a module that we were able to build into our life skills curricula to ensure that youth were aware of normal wage ranges for young people so that their expectations weren't preventing them from getting a job. So that's one way that we concretely modified some of our skills curricula about it. And in Liberia, it kind of gave us a chance to step back and do a little bit of course correction. So initially we thought, okay, we're going to place, hundreds of youth in these internships, but reality really steps in when you go to some of these more rural areas and the private sector is actually very weak and you're chasing job placements and internship opportunities that really just don't exist. So how do you work around that? We noticed that agriculture was a huge part of the informal economy there, and youth were actually already engaged to some degree in this kind of work. So now, and I think this is why you're going out there, to kind of really focus and make sure that our workforce readiness curricula is a bit ag-focused and has some of those ag lessons in there. And this information can also kind of dictate how a program wants to work with the private sector. So in both Kenya and Liberia, we had, immediate lists of employers that were willing to take on interns or that had job openings. So we had those action points right there. And as well, in Liberia, we were able to identify private sector leaders who could then participate in what is called the county alliances, which are kind of these leadership structure boards that can give general guidance to the program as well. So a lot of valuable information can come from them. Yeah.
Well, and that's a lead into, I guess, number 9, which is, the role of iterative LMAs in a project, particularly a project that has several years. It's a multi-year project. So as Tara mentioned, what we did in Liberia, great upfront LMA. We then started to see evolving program realities and what we learned. So now our question before us is, all right, how do we focus? What's the best way to focus follow-on LMAs? Is it to look at new value chains that maybe we were clearly missing the first time around? Is it to go into more depth in terms of particular niches in some of the informal economy that we hadn't found before? Again, particularly in agriculture. Is it, so some of these promising mentors and alliances and so on, to really, go back to them as opposed to new actors. So this is what we're actually in the midst of grappling with right now is, now that you've had this baseline, you've had evolving project reality, what do we focus on for this iterative approach? And to be continued.
Okay, so number 10. So other than uncovering supply and demand, what is so important about youth participation? So primarily, obviously, we're looking to find, available job opportunities for youth. But I really think that the process is almost as important as the information that we're uncovering. So just like you said with that experience in Liberia, just really giving youth those leadership opportunities that they are capable of, that they are interested in. And these assessments can help them to develop their research skills, but also really understand their local economies. And maybe most importantly, can really facilitate links to the private sector, expand their social networks, build social capital, and maybe they'll learn some things like, okay, the community perceives youth to be untrustworthy, how can we work around that? And we had some amazing anecdotal experience, both from Kenya and Liberia, of youth that would go out and do these surveys and come back and say, I was offered a job because this employer was so impressed with how articulate and poised I was and how professional I was. So it really gave them kind of a good entry point and facilitated a great interaction between them and local employers. It really also builds their confidence and their communication skills and kind of puts them in a situation that they may not have had exposure to before. And finally, we really tell the youth to treat, their participation in these assessments like a job. So show up on time, make sure you're presenting yourself well, get quality information, and in many ways, this is a learning experience for a lot of them. And we tell youth to put, their work on the assessment on their CV, and we welcome them to, follow up with program staff for references and whatnot, but really treating it like it is something important, because it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And we did see that some of our assessors from our LMA got subsequent opportunities to do other kinds of baseline studies based on the skills they had, which was really quite rewarding. So, agreed.
Yeah. So that's our top 10 list.
Exactly. So really, we'd love to, at this point, have sort of a question and answer or interactive.
Like, this should not have been on your list, or this was, really
this
missing.
should be emphasized. You guys kind of missed this. I mean, this is what we're all in this for. And people on the phone, really, we appreciated what you'd had to say before. So everyone, chip in.
This is Janice. I'm sorry, I can't see if other people have their hands raised.
Go for it, Janice.
So, a couple of, just thinking about all the things you said and, experience primarily on the business development side, but also sort of doing a lot of stuff on this workforce side. It's just a couple of ideas to throw out. One is my experience with businesses in most countries, and I tend to include the U.S. and Europe, but definitely in developing countries, is that most businesses really don't understand where their market opportunities are. So if you do a survey and you ask them what kinds of skills do you need, often they don't know where their opportunities are, and so they may name some things that they already know they need, but they won't see where the real opportunities for them are, and therefore they need skills. So one thing to think about is, do you definitely need a conscious two-tier approach to this? One is the small subset of businesses that understand where the international market opportunities and are pretty sophisticated and really know, and often they tend to be IT companies, really know what they need that they don't have in terms of skills, and then the broader group of companies that really don't have that, and really being very conscious of that these companies may come back and say they need X, Y, Z, but the reality is it's not only limited, but that market that they're thinking about may be closing. But it also kind of raises the question of, does it make any sense to do look at labor market analyses and other workforce development things without really understanding and helping businesses get into their own market? And maybe you don't have to do it all as one project, but making sure those projects are really closely collaborating so that you can help do that. So I'm thinking, for example, in Macedonia, if we had gone out and said to the machine tool companies or to the apparel companies in particular, do you need people with CAD/CAM experience? They'd say, what? What are you talking about? But a year and a half later, they paid for that training in the local high schools. They covered the cost because their market had opened due to our project, and so they saw that they really needed those skills. So, tying those seems to me like, the USAID projects in particular, with a lot of them, they just seem like they're not well enough integrated, or they could be better integrated in that. And one thing I always do look for is, will companies pay for the training? I mean, it's very easy for them to say we need this or we need that or we need something else, but will they actually, put some cash up for that? And then the only other thing I would mention is, Mike raised, I think it was Mike said, what do the companies get out of that, which is obviously crucial. And one thing is, if the labor survey, but also is looking at a larger market survey, can put something together back that says, here's where the market's going, here's where there are opportunities, and when the youth go back to get the second round of labor data, or maybe not, maybe they just go back and visit these companies, but that they have something to offer to say, we looked at companies in your industry, and, we just wanted to give you some, feedback on, and very briefly, where are the market opportunities, what's opening up, where are things closing. You can even look at things like Bureau of Labor Statistics and see in the U.S. and see kind of where some things are happening. And that would help them, the businesses, feel as though they're getting something back, from the information they're giving.
Janice, thanks. Those are great points. And immediately when you were mentioning, certainly the first one and even the second, that thought of market saturation sort of in my mind. I mean, we, fall into traps in that whole element of you train everybody to be a hairdresser because that's what everybody says they want to do in Nimba County, and so part of our job is to say, well, hey, maybe there's some other elements and things other than hairdressing and motorcycle, the pen driving. So, and really in the same way, helping particularly smaller businesses, as you say, maybe just seeing trends about market saturation and where that's going, and that's really a gift or value that we have as a project back to these businesses. Totally resonates. So I appreciate that a lot.
Just to add to that, Mike, I mean, I think the thing that makes the U.S. strong is that people can see lots of things going on. And so they get lots of ideas. And so bringing that, I mean, that's where our value add is to come to those businesses and say, there's no X in Liberia, or there's no this or that, or there's really opportunities to grow this or that or something else. To help them see where the new opportunities are that they don't have, haven't been exposed to.
That's great. Did anyone else want to respond to that point, or thanks, Janice.
I was also just going to add that it points to this really strong need for sharing information. So we've done this assessment. How can we ensure that everyone we've talked to has a copy or know the trends and the findings?
Hello, this is Afni with an important call for Sabrina, Kenny. If this is Sabrina, Kenny.
That's no problem. Hopefully Sabrina will get the call.
Phone.
I was going to say that I also really agree with that two-tier approach because we can't train youth for jobs if those jobs don't exist. So I absolutely think we should simultaneously be working specifically with SMEs to ensure that we're helping them expand and diversify and grow so that for youth that are interested, in employment, that those jobs do exist on the market. That obviously takes a lot more time and is a different approach than just, youth training and skills.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure what that was, but we may have to ask our callers to dial in again, so I apologize.
No problem. Does anyone else have any reactions to Janice's points? No?
Cool. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, please.
So I do think that that's really critical, and that's something I know in the Liberia perspective, I just happened to luckily be sitting in the mission when a lot of this was going on. And they were really diligent about, while the education office was the one leading the activity, to pull in the economic growth office and try to bring together both sides of that picture, which I don't think always happens, but when it does, so enriches the activity because different people, from the two sides of the coin, you think of very different issues in bringing that together. And this is very true. Why would we be helping people get into a market that's dying in that country or that region anyway? And lots of times that question isn't even asked at that higher level. Where are the regional trends? Where are, the bigger things coming down the pike? Where our projects can collaborate. It might be too much for one project to take all of that on, but, we're always going to have multiple projects that can connect on these issues, at least in certain sectors, if not all of them. So I think that is a very essential point. And so I'm glad Janice made that.
Bridging what you're saying, these assessments, like in Liberia, reveal a lot of information about education, skills, and curriculum and so on. Obviously, economic growth, health issues, psychosocial types of issues. There's just so many, and frankly, community participation. So all of it. And I would just then ask, how can we also, Simon, this is back to your point a little bit, or question, stimulate or enhance collaboration of the different counterpart ministries as well? We had Ministry of Youth and Sports being a really great advocate and champion. How do you also engage Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of, Finance? I'm not sure, but some of the others effectively in this, do you try and, is it too unwieldy to set up almost a national, steering committee? Simon, you're probably shaking your head on that. Anyway, these would be very cumbersome or challenging, but how do you enhance that coordination also on the host country counterpart side for that as well?
Well, and then one other piece of it that I think, and how do you do all this? But in a perfect world, is the ability of migration and how that fits in. Yeah. In some countries, obviously, that's a huge thing where international migration versus from county to county. In Liberia, can people relocate to Monrovia? Is that a non-starter? And how does that impact their choices? Which obviously is huge. And I think sometimes we orient these too much around specific things. And while I'm a value chain person, so I love that people are talking about value chains, that's great. But maybe that's not necessarily the right thing to do. Maybe it would be better to look at the household system and the way that the livelihoods of that household are orienting. And do they have somebody that's migrated to the capital that's sending urban remittances back that then can be invested in a new business opportunity in that rural area or whatever? Mm-hmm. Maybe it would be more effective to reorient from that perspective to think, okay, how can the youth best support? In so many of these cultures, it's really about the youth and the family unit, whereas we think in our very individualistic American orientation that it's about the youth and that youth achieving success for themselves, but maybe it's more about how they feed into that family system. And I haven't seen too much really looking at that perspective of it.
And just to add another level of complexity, in a lot of the areas where we work, youth are often parents themselves, and so it's multiple households that they're being asked to take care of. So it is a big question to think about for sure.
I was wondering, how many youth do you usually train when you do these TOTs and involve in the study?
I mean, sure, it varies.
Yeah.
It varies on the scope of the assessment and also the scope of the program. So in Kenya, we had 20 youth, 10 male, 10 female, and we surveyed about 250 businesses. And then in Liberia, we had about 40 youth assessors, and we surveyed around over 600 businesses.
Okay.
So, but that was covering 5 counties, also a larger geographic area
Mm-hmm.
than the Kenya study. So those are just 2 examples, but it varies.
Okay.
Was there any issues between having the youth who were doing the assessments were university graduates or at least high school graduates, whereas the youth for the program were illiterate, basic grades 1 to 6. So they're looking at they're coming from very different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Was there much overlap there, or were their lifestyles so different that they couldn't really understand what they were looking at?
I mean, I think through the course of a lot of the focus group discussions, there were a lot of commonalities that they were able to find. I mean, particularly if you think about like the role of females in Liberia. So there were some points where they were able to connect. But yeah, that absolutely is a challenge because you obviously, want to get, high achieving people to conduct a quality survey, but often that's very different from your typical program beneficiary. So that conflict definitely does exist.
One way we're trying to maybe address this issue is giving or helping develop tools for really local implementing organizations, NGOs, to try and carry out these market assessments themselves with fairly minimal supervision from HQ home office. And that will be, I think we're piloting some of that a little bit in Rwanda, for example, in part maybe to try and address that issue and just to also, build capacity. So I know it's a really good point, but when we get some results back from that pilot and see how that works as well, we can let you know.
What I think was also helpful in Liberia is that we surveyed 5 counties and we tried to choose youth assessors from the particular counties. So they, had really strong knowledge about some of the youth that they were going to be meeting and, how the local towns worked. So I think that definitely helped as well.
One of the things that we did it was not a labor market assessment, but a community youth mapping activity in Haiti. We actually took youth who would be part of the program, who would know more than 3 years of formal schooling, usually illiterate, and partnered them with another young person who had more education. And it was a little rocky at times. I mean, you have to be prepared for that. But in the end, that was the one thing that I kept reading about in the report, that most of the youth found the most rewarding was working with somebody very different from them on both sides. They thought, it was really great to see that person is not actually that different from me. And, they talked about that more than the skills they gained or the leadership the skills and the leadership opportunities. So that's another way you can sometimes do it, although you do have to be ready for that and, not just say, you're all youth, you can get along, because that definitely does not happen. So you have to be, in your training and preparation, prepare everybody involved.
Anything else that was missing from our top 10 list?
Hi, this is Steve again from the foundation. I just had a question. I don't know if I missed it in the top 10, but the importance of also including financial service providers, banks, microfinance institutions, VSLA groups in the assessment as well, because if so much of the jobs are going to be created through the informal sector and the need to do entrepreneurship, then access to finance is going to be a critical component. So seeing what products and services are available to youth is another thing to keep in mind. And then the last, or just 2 very, very quick points. One on, especially for the value chain and rural assessments, is on land tenure and youth and trying to decide not only what kind of crops or agricultural opportunities are available, but also the importance of young people having access to land to actually grow those crops and benefit from them, and whether they have simply access to enough land to do that is an important piece. And then lastly, on the points on going back and including stakeholders once the surveys are done, again, this initial work that we've done with Dalberg and SAVE, they've done validation workshops after the initial reports have come out, so they've brought together all the people who were interviewed through the market assessments and then kind of showcased the high-level results and then got feedback to not only close the loop but make sure that the interpretation was correct. And I think those validation workshops have gone a long way in re-engaging the policymakers, private sector actors, banks, and others to see what the outcome of the survey actually was.
Steve, did the validation workshops change any conclusions at all from the survey? Did were there any sort of major tweaks or revisions that needed to happen after those?
Yeah, I'm told. I've only seen the first iteration. I haven't seen the draft since the validation workshops, but I'm told that actually that some of the things that they came up with when they did the validation workshop, they have made changes. So I think they were a valuable step, and there will be a change in some of the results.
Well, certainly your point about MFIs, and Tari, maybe you can speak to this. I know this came out in the recommendation for the LMA. Access to finance, not surprising, came out as one of the crucial constraints that youth identified in terms of starting a business or successfully maintaining one. And so we definitely put that in as a policy recommendation as such, to try and improve that environment. And, access to land, that's a good question. We really focused on that in this Livelihoods baseline survey about land and sort of investments and inputs needed, but that's a really good thought to put that in maybe in the LMA itself. So I take your point. Thank you.
Yeah, well, just to add on the access to finance, that came out really strongly among the youth, but also among the business owners who said, look, we'd love to expand our businesses, but we're also, looking for reliable financial services. So I do think that is a really important point. And sometimes I think on youth employment programs, we focus so much on youth that it would be advantageous for us to take a step back and say, well, we can actually really benefit youth if we actually just work with the SMEs and work to help them build kind of the larger system itself. Yeah.
Just one note about financial services is that there have been some people who've looked at this, and everybody who talks to SMEs, virtually any business, that's the first thing they'll tell you they need. But now there are studies that are starting to indicate, at least suggest, and I don't know, they have to be maybe taken with a grain of salt, but that although businesses will say they need that's actually it doesn't really help them much. And there was a study, kind of interesting study, about a year ago from the Norwegian School of Economics and Business Administration that concluded, they looked at survey data. They also did a lab experiment where they had control groups and all this stuff, and they were looking at what's the most binding constraint. Is it capital, financial capital, or is it human capital? I mean, is there something else? Is it training? So they're looking at which had the biggest impact, training or access to financial aid or financial capital. And what they concluded, based on their data, were that that loans and access to financial capital didn't help any of the companies, male or female. They were looking also at male, female, either male or female. That the training had a significant impact on the they were looking at male entrepreneurs, but none on the female entrepreneurs. And so neither really helped the female entrepreneurs, and only the training, which includes mentoring and stuff, but not the financial assistance or access, helped the male entrepreneurs. So I don't know how much we can, that we depend on this, but it was a really surprising and kind of interesting conclusion, and they have a rather robust methodology. So anyway, and I'm happy to forward this to anybody who's interested if you want me to.
The World Bank did a meta-analysis of entrepreneurship programs worldwide, and they did, Janice, kind of come to that same conclusion, or their economists did, that access alone was not sufficient to help SMEs, but you had to have a bundled package of services, really, to make it effective. So I don't know if that's available. That I saw that presentation, but I hear your point on that. Any other thoughts? Yeah? Okay. Well, we had I don't know, if this is a bit of a reach, we don't have to do this, but we were sort of thinking, okay, this has been a really nice, collection of sort of insights and lessons and observations. We sort of had some questions about, all right, where do we take this? I mean, are there some recommendations or thoughts for information sharing or what to do with this kind of, the outcomes from this discussion? Tara, you want to elaborate?
So how can we take this discussion that we've had here today and move it forward? So we have some themes that came up, and I know information sharing is one of them, but what are some things that we can do to ensure that, if you're doing a market assessment and you're working in the same country, that information can be shared? And it's a struggle.
Maybe you can, Sarah, this is where you come in.
Yeah, well, one of the things, and the purpose of today as part of a larger learning series is to create a forum where the conversation and the questions raised in this discussion don't end with this event, but that we keep coming back. And I hope that you'll view the AIYD as a forum for that. But certainly we can help set up some systems for ongoing communication, discussion, resource sharing. It's important for us to get a sense from you, from a practical standpoint, what would help you as you go out into the field or as you look at doing a labor market assessment, for example, as just one aspect of youth development programming, how to get your hands on resources and what makes the most sense. So I don't know if that's an answer, but I invite you to be in touch with me and let me know what is helpful to you and your organization, and also to engage AIYD and come back to us with other ideas for how either to revisit this topic with a specific focus down the road. We can certainly do that, carry the conversation on online.
Or maybe some of the themes that go into more depth, and some of the themes were picked up today. This issue of sequencing your sort of your design with training curriculum and where youth are entering in that. This issue of remittances and sort of how can LMAs maybe be more, start capturing that flow, and then as opposed to sort of a social engineering context, but sort of can we adapt to realities in a different way or think about them in a different way? So maybe there's just a couple themes that we can sort of hone in on a little more depth that came out of today. This issue of microfinance and so on, or land tenure. So
and I think also the labor analysis is also looking at the larger market and trying to kind of go beyond what the local companies might do, and that is something that could be really shared, because a lot of times the opportunity for India isn't so different than the opportunity for Liberia. I mean that there's something valuable about knowing where other people found the market opportunities that aren't necessarily evident to the local companies.
That's a great point.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
I was just going to say my final point to add to that would be not even just sharing the final reports, but if there's a tool that you came across that you used that was really helpful in capturing specific information, I think that's something that could also benefit all of us as well. Or if a tool was a complete disaster, also lessons learned are also useful.
Okay, great. Thanks everybody. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's fine.
Go again.
Great. Yeah, it was nice.
Hey, Simon, if you come into the office, I'm going to order a taxi.
Email them to me. I'm happy to share them with you.
Okay. Yeah, I think that was one of our main struggles. We thought we had trained up the researchers.
Yeah,
There wasn't
I just want to make sure if we need a bigger cab, I get a big enough one order. Yeah.
Back, there was a lot of. Luckily, our field team had been in for a lot of interviews, so we had a lot of trouble with what was captured and get a sense of gaps.
You got everybody on the phone, their addresses.
And I really like doing it.
It sort of shows that sort of continuity and building out.
And sometimes when we talk about youth, like in Africa, we're talking about 35-year-olds. So so definitely taking on the job.
Okay.
Yeah. Follow up with me.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Hi.
I'm talking about I'm from social impact.
Really interesting. This one about workplaces and
coordinated, like, just from
Sorry, what's the exact address?
Sure. 1416th Street North. That our company for evaluating.
And these are usually run by
Georgetown,
India, and then a few other NGOs.
I want to make sure that I can compare the ones that
Youth Led, that one's 60
I do.
But I think I got it.
Okay, can the driver call when they arrive?
I think it's
You know,
fun.
continue.
Okay, thank you.
I like content.
It was good. It felt good to do something.
Pretty good quality.
we definitely are, just because most of this we were.
I think so.
Thanks for getting so bad.
Yeah, I'm just sick of shoving out cash and dealing with that.
No, I can't do it.
And I rely on Tiger half the time.
Make Tiger called Global Citizen for it.
Online leadership cash as well. So I'm trying to get in the better habit of
But that's very useful as well.
organizing these, just dealing with them.
But I mean,
Maybe now that Uber tab exists, I mean,
My question about it is not just for the documents to but also for these used to compare 100 times Uber in the levels of maybe skills.
well,
I think there's not definite trends that we can compare, but
I'm not there.
We are going to talk about some of
okay, or like for a very specific need of certain proposals and whatnot. But ultimately, I
Okay,
think
cool.
we want to be in
Yeah.
a place where we can, kind of have a broad range of things.
thank you. Sure. I'm going to come back and